Hi, I'm Dr. Cheryl Meier, and this is The Princess and the Kirti. The Princess and the Goblin. The next one is Princess and the Kirti, so I hope to do that as well. Ah, that's funny. My kid's out there whistling. I have all the candles are lit. And my roses still. And I was at the beach doing the other one. And at the fire. Really excited. Thank you so much for joining. This has been so fun. And I've learned now to keep my head up. So hopefully I'll remember to do that in this last one. This is so great. Chapter 24. That's so funny. He just started whistling. And we have the guardian angel candle. Yeah, you can see it back there. And then there's a Christ one back there with roses. All right. Okay, let's start. Oh, and I found this as I was getting ready. It was in this back drawer of mine, and I was looking for something else, and I found this. And of course, it's covered with roses, pink and blue, and I can't believe it. And I grabbed these. I don't know why. So we'll see if these come into the story. I don't remember. They're just candy that looks like gold. All right. Chapter 24. Irene behaves like a princess. I'll do it like this so that I'm looking up. When the princess awoke from the sweetest of sleeps, she found her nurse bending above her, the housekeeper looking over the nurse's shoulder, and the laundry maid looking over the housekeeper's. The room was full of women servants, and the gentlemen at arms, with a long column of men servants behind them, were peeping or trying to peep in at the door of the nursery. "Are those horrid creatures gone?" asked the princess, remembering first what had terrified her in the morning. Oh, I forgot my mic. I'll plug it. You see Jesus above me. They were peeping or trying to peep in at the door of the nursery to find out if she was okay, I bet. "Are those horrid creatures gone?" asked the princess, remembering first what had terrified her in the morning. "You naughty, naughty little princess," cried Ludi. Her face was very pale, with red streaks in it, and she looked as if she were going to shake her, but Irene said nothing, only waited to hear what should come next. This is called being in the flow. You listen, and you're present in the moment. Everything is so beautiful behind. So many roses and candles. I love it. All right. But Irene said nothing, only waited to hear what should come next. "How could you get under the clothes like that?" The bedclothes, that's what they call them. Sheets and blankets. "And make us all fancy you were lost. And keep it up all day, too. You are the most obstinate child." "It's anything but fun to us, I can tell you." It was the only way the nurse could account for her disappearance. "I didn't do that, Ludi," said Irene very quietly. "Don't tell stories," cried the nurse quite rudely. Oh, here's a picture. I wonder what this is going to be. "I shall tell you nothing at all," said Irene. "That's just as bad," said the nurse. "Just as bad to say nothing at all as to tell stories," exclaimed the prince. "Just as bad to say nothing at all as to tell stories," exclaimed the princess. "I will ask my papa about that. He won't say so, and I don't think he will like you to say so." "Tell me directly what you mean by it," screamed the nurse, half wild with anger at the princess and fright at the possible consequence to herself. "When I tell you the truth, Ludi," said the princess, who somehow did not feel at all angry, "you say to me, 'Don't tell stories.' It seems I must tell stories before you will believe me." "You are very rude, princess," said the nurse. "You are so rude, Ludi, that I will not speak to you again till you are sorry." "Why should I, when I know you will not believe me?" returned the princess. For she did know perfectly well that if she were to tell Ludi what she had been about, the more she went on to tell her, the less she would believe her. "You are the most provoking child," cried the nurse. "You deserve to be well punished for your wicked behavior." "Please, Mrs. Housekeeper," said the princess, "will you take me to your room and keep me till my king papa comes? I will ask him to come as soon as he can." Everyone stared at these words. Up to this moment, they had all regarded her as little more than a baby. But the housekeeper was afraid of the nurse and sought to patch matters up, saying, "I am sure, princess, Nursey did not mean to be rude to you. I do not think my papa would wish me to have a nurse who spoke to me as Ludi does. If she thinks I tell lies, she had better either say so to my papa or go away. Sir Walter, will you take charge of me?" "With the greatest of pleasure, princess," answered the captain of the gentlemen-at-arms, walking with his great stride into the room. The crowd of servants made eager way for him, and he bowed low before the little princess's bed. "I shall send my servant at once, on the fastest horse in the stable, to tell your king papa that your royal highness desires his presence. When you have chosen one of these under-servants to wait upon you, I shall order the room to be cleared." "Thank you very much, Sir Walter," said the princess, and her eye glanced towards a rosy-cheeked girl who had lately come to the house as a scullery maid. I just remembered, sorry. I'm gonna cry. "I think, Sir Walter," said the princess, "I will keep Ludi, but when Ludi saw the eyes of her dear princess going in search of another instead of her, she fell upon her knees by the bedside and burst into a great cry of distress. "I think, Sir Walter," said the princess, "I will keep Ludi, but I put myself under your care, and you need not trouble my king papa until I speak to you again. Will you all please to go away? I am quite safe and well, and I did not hide myself for the sake either of amusing myself or of troubling my people. Ludi, will you please to dress me?" Chapter 25. Kirti comes to grief. Everything was for some time quite quiet above ground. The king was still away in a distant part of his dominions. The men-at-arms kept watching about the house. They had been considerably astonished by finding at the foot of the rock in the garden the hideous body of the goblin creature killed by Kirti, but they came to the conclusion that it had been slain in the mines and had crept out there to die, and except an occasional glimpse of a live one, they saw nothing to cause alarm. Kirti kept watching in the mountain, and the goblins kept burrowing deeper in the earth. As long as they went deeper, there was, Kirti judged, no immediate danger. Something smells a little bit burning. I'm so happy. Okay. To Irene, the summer was as full of pleasure as ever, and for a long time, although she often thought of her grandmother during the day and often dreamed about her at night, she did not see her. The kids and the flowers, the goats, they call them kids. The kids and the flowers were as much her delight as ever. She made as much friendship with the miners' children she met on the mountain as Ludi would permit, and those kids as well. But Ludi had very foolish notions concerning the dignity of a princess, not understanding that the truest princess is just the one who loves all her brothers and sisters best, and who is most able to do them good by being humble towards them. At the same time, she was considerably altered for the better in her behavior to the princess. She could not help seeing that she was no longer a mere child, but wiser than her age would account for. I forgot I have the mic on. Wiser than her age would account for. She kept foolishly whispering to the servants, however, sometimes that the princess was not right in her mind. People will think that if they're not in their heart space. Sometimes that she was too good to live. So sometimes she could see. and other nonsense of the same sort. All this time, Kirti had to be sorry without a chance of confessing that he had behaved so unkindly to the princess. This perhaps made him the more diligent in his endeavors to serve her. His mother and he often talked on the subject, and she comforted him and told him she was sure he would someday have the opportunity he so much desired. Here I should like to remark, for the sake of princes and princesses in general, that it is a low and contemptible thing to refuse to confess a fault, or even an error. If a true princess has done wrong, she is always uneasy until she has had an opportunity of throwing the wrongness away from her by saying, "I did it, and I wish I had not. And I am sorry for having done it." I put that on my Twitter tonight. I'm sorry. I love you. Thank you. It's a prayer. It's a Hawaiian prayer. It's sorry, please forgive me. Thank you. I love you. It transforms things and turns them into gold and heals. Anyway. It's weird that I put that. Anyway. If a true princess has done wrong, she is always uneasy until she has had an opportunity of throwing the wrongness away from her by saying, "I did it, and I wish I had not, and I am sorry for having done it." So you see, there is some ground for supposing that Kirti was not a minor only, but a prince as well. Many such instances have been known in the world's history. At length, however, he began to see signs of a change in the proceedings of the Goblin's excavators. They were going no deeper, but had commenced running on a level, and he watched them therefore more closely than ever. All at once, one night, coming to a slope of very hard rock, they began to ascend along the inclined plane of its surface. Having reached its top, they went again on a level for a night or two, after which they began to ascend once more and kept on at a pretty steep angle. At length, Kirti judged it time to transfer his observation to another quarter, and the next night he did not go to the mine at all, but leaving his pickaxe and clue at home, and the clue is, I can't remember, another tool, and taking only his usual lumps of bread and peas pudding, went down the mountain to the king's house. He climbed over the wall and remained in the garden the whole night, creeping on hands and knees from one spot to the other, and lying at full length with his ear to the ground, listening, but he heard nothing except the tread of the men-at-arms as they marched about, whose observation, as the night was cloudy and there was no moon, he had little difficulty in avoiding. I'm sure they were watching very well. For several following nights, he continued to haunt the garden and listen, but with no success. At length, early one evening, whether it was that he had got careless of his own safety, or that the growing moon had become strong enough to expose him, his watching came to a sudden end. He was creeping from behind the rock where the stream ran out, for he had been listening all around it in the hope that he might convey to his ear some indication of the whereabouts of the goblin miners, when just as he came up into the moonlight on the lawn, a whiz in his ear and a blow upon his leg startled him. He instantly squatted in the hope of eluding further notice, but when he heard the sound of running feet, he jumped up to take a chance of escape by flight. He fell, however, with a keen shoot of pain, for the bolt of a crossbow had wounded his leg, and the blood was now streaming from it. He was instantly laid hold of by 2 or 3 of the men-at-arms. It was useless to struggle, and he submitted in silence. Let me show you the picture. "It's a boy!" cried several of them together in a tone of amazement. "I thought it was one of those demons." "What are you about here? Going to have a little rough usage, apparently," said Kirti, laughing, as the men shook him. "Impertinence will do you no good. You have no business here in the king's grounds, and if you don't give a true account of yourself, you shall fare as a thief." "Why, what else could he be?" said one. "He might have been after a lost kid, a lost child goat, suggested another. "I see no good in trying to excuse him. He has no business here anyhow." "Let me go away then, if you please," said Kirti. "But we don't please, not except you give a good account of yourself." I don't feel quite sure whether I can trust you, said Kirti. We are the king's own men-at-arms, said the captain courteously, for he was taken with Kirti's appearance and courage. Well, I will tell you all about it if you will promise to listen to me and not do anything rash. I call that cool, said one of the party, laughing. He will tell us what mischief he was about, if we promise to do as pleases him. I was about no mischief, said Kirti. But ere he could say more, he turned faint and fell senseless on the grass. Then first they discovered that the bolt they had shot, taking him for one of the goblin creatures, had wounded him. They carried him into the house and laid him down in the hall. The report spread that they had caught a robber, and the servants crowded in to see the villain. Amongst the rest came the nurse. The moment she saw him, she exclaimed with indignation, I declare it's the same young rascal of a miner that was rude to me and the princess on the mountain. Oh, my goodness. How could she say that? He actually wanted to kiss the princess. I took care of that, the wretch. Oh, people to save their own skins sometimes. It's okay. All will come to right. And he was prowling about, was he? Just like his impudence. Ugh. The princess being fast asleep and Kirti in a faint, she could misrepresent at her pleasure. The Ludi could, When he heard this, the captain, although he had considerable doubt of its truth, resolved to keep Kirti a prisoner until they could search into the affair. So after they had brought him round a little and attended to his wound, which was rather a bad one, they laid him, still exhausted from the loss of blood, upon a mattress in a disused room, one of those already so often mentioned, and locked the door and left him. He passed a troubled night, and in the morning they found him talking wildly. In the evening he came to himself, but felt very weak, and his leg was exceedingly painful. Wondering where he was, and seeing one of the men-at-arms in the room, he began to question him, and soon recalled the events of the preceding night. As he was himself unable to watch any more, he told the soldier all he knew about the goblins, and begged him to tell his companions, and to stir them up to watch with tenfold vigilance. But whether it was that he did not talk quite coherently, or that the whole thing appeared incredible, certainly the man concluded that Kirti was only raving still, and tried to coax him into holding his tongue. This, of course, annoyed Kirti dreadfully, who now felt in his turn what it was to not be believed. That sometimes happens. And the consequence was that his fever returned, and by the time when, at his persistent entreaties, the captain was called, there could be no doubt that he was raving. They did for him what they could, and promised everything he wanted, but with no intention of fulfillment. At last he went to sleep, and when at length his sleep grew profound and peaceful, they left him, locked the door again, and withdrew, intending to revisit him early in the morning. Chapter 26, The Goblin Miners. Oh, I think we're going to have to do this in two. I thought this was the end. That same night, several of the servants were having a chat together before going to bed. What can that noise be? Said one of the housemaids who had been listening for a moment or two. I've heard it the last 2 nights, said the cook. If there were any about the place, I should have taken it for rats, but my Tom keeps them far enough. I think that's the tomcat. I've heard, though, said the scullery maid, that rats move about in great companies sometimes. There may be an army of them invading us. I've heard the noises yesterday and today, too. It'll be grand fun for my Tom and Mrs. Housekeeper's Bob and the cook, said the cook. They'll be friends for once in their lives and fight on the same side. I'll engage Tom and Bob together will put to fight any number of rats. It seems to me, said the nurse, that the noises are much too loud for that. I've heard them all day, and my princess has asked me several times what they could be. Sometimes they sound like distant thunder, and sometimes like the noises you hear in the mountains from those horrid miners underneath. I shouldn't wonder, said the cook, if it was the miners after all. They may have come on some hole in the mountain through which the noises reach to us. They're always boring and blasting and breaking, you know. As he spoke, there came a great rolling rumble beneath them, and the house quivered. They all started up in a fright, and rushing to the hall, found the gentlemen-at-arms in consternation also. They had sent to wake their captain, who said from their description that it must have been an earthquake, an occurrence which, although very rare in that country, had taken place almost within the century, and then went to bed again, strange to say, and fell fast asleep without once thinking of Kirti or associating the noises they had heard with what he had told them. He had not believed Kirti. If he had, he would have at once have thought of what he had said, and would have taken precautions. As they heard nothing more, they concluded that Sir Walter was right, and the danger was over for perhaps another 100 years. The fact, as discovered afterwards, was that the goblins had, in working up a second sloping face of stone, arrived at a huge block which lay under the cellars of the house, within the line of the foundations. It was so round that when they succeeded, after hard work, in dislodging it without blasting, it rolled thundering down the slope with a bounding, jarring roll which shook the foundations of the house. The goblins were themselves dismayed at the noise, for they knew by careful spying and measuring that they must now be very near, if not under the king's house, and they feared giving an alarm. They therefore remained quiet for a while, and when they began to work again, they no doubt thought themselves very fortunate in coming upon a vein of sand which filled a winding fissure in the rock on the house which was built. By scooping this away, they soon came out in the king's wine cellar. No sooner did they find where they were than they scurried back again like rats into their holes, and running at full speed to the goblin palace, announced their success to the king and queen with shouts of triumph. In a moment, the goblin royal family and the whole goblin people were on their way in hot haste to the king's house, each eager to have a share in the glory of carrying off that same night the Princess Irene. The queen went stumping along in one shoe of stone and one of skin. This could not have been pleasant, and my readers may wonder that with such skillful workmen about her, she had not yet replaced the shoe carried off by Kirti. As the king, however, had more than one ground of objection to her stone shoes, he no doubt took advantage of the discovery of her toes, and threatened to expose her deformity if she had another made. I presume he insisted on her being content with skin shoes, and allowed her to wear the remaining granite one on the present occasion only because she was going out to war. They soon arrived in the king's wine cellar, and regardless of its huge vessels, of which they did not know the use, proceeded at once, but as quietly as they could, to force the door that led upwards. Chapter 27. The Goblins in the King's House. When Kirti fell asleep and began at once to dream, he thought he was ascending the mountainside from the mouth of the mine, whistling and singing, ring, dod, bang, when he came upon a woman and a child who had lost their way. And from that point he went on dreaming everything that had happened to him since he thus met the princess and Ludi, how he had watched the goblins, how he had been taken by them, how he had been rescued by the princess, everything indeed, until he was wounded, captured and imprisoned by the men-at-arms. And now he thought he was lying wide awake where they had laid him, when suddenly he heard a great thundering sound. "The cobs are coming," he said. "They didn't believe a word I told them. The cobs will be carrying off the princess from under their stupid noses. But they shan't. They shan't." He jumped up, as he thought, and began to dress, but to his dismay found that he was still lying in the bed. "Now then, I will," he said. "Here goes. I am up now." But yet again he found himself snug in bed. 20 times he tried, and 20 times he failed. For in fact, he was not awake, only dreaming that he was. At length, in an agony of despair, fancying he heard the goblins all over the house, he gave a great cry. Then there came, as he thought, a hand upon the lock of his door. It opened, and looking up, he saw a lady with white hair. We know, right? I don't want to cry. Carrying a silver box in her hand. Enter the room. She came to his bed, he thought, stroked his head and face with cool, soft hands, took the dressing from his leg, rubbed it with something that smelt like roses. Here's the roses. Well, we know the roses over there, too. Thank you, Rose. Let's see if I can leave this here. And she came to his bed, he thought, stroked his head and face with cool, soft hands, took the dressing from his leg, rubbed it with something that smelt like roses, and then waved her hands over him 3 times. At the last wave of her hands, everything vanished. He felt himself sinking into the profoundest slumber and remembered nothing more until he woke in earnest. The setting moon was throwing a feeble light through the casement, and the house was full of uproar. There were soft, heavy, multitudinous sounds, stamping, a clashing and clanging of weapons, the voices of men and the cries of women mixed with the hideous bellowing, which sounded victorious. The Cobbs were in the house. He sprung from his bed, hurried on some of his clothes, not forgetting his shoes, which were armed with nails. He put nails on his shoes, you'll see. Then spying an old hunting knife or short sword hanging on the wall, he caught it and rushed down the stairs, guided by the sounds of strife, which grew louder and louder. When he reached the ground floor, he found the whole place swarming. All the goblins of the mountain seemed gathered there. He rushed amongst them, shouting, 1, 2, hit and hew, 3, 4, blast and bore. And with every rhyme he came down a great stamp upon a foot, cutting at the same time at their faces, executing indeed a sword dance of the wildest description. Away scattered the goblins in every direction, into closets, upstairs, into chimneys, up on rafters, and down to the cellars. Kirti went on stamping and slashing and singing, but saw nothing of the people of the house until he came to the great hall, in which, the moment he entered it, arose a great goblin shout. The last of the men-at-arms, the captain himself, was on the floor, buried beneath the wallowing crowd of goblins, for while each knight was busy defending himself as well as he could by stabs in the thick bodies of the goblins, for he had soon found their heads all but invulnerable, the queen had attacked his legs and feet with her horrible granite shoe, and was soon down, but the captain had got his back to the wall and stood out longer. The goblins would have torn them all to pieces, but the king had given orders to carry them away alive, and over each of them in 12 groups was standing a knot of goblins, while as many as could find room were sitting upon their prostrate bodies. Kirti burst in, dancing and gyrating and stamping and singing like a small incarnate whirlwind. Let me see if I can do this. I'll put it back up. There. This is so awesome. Where 'tis all a hole, sir, never can be holes. Why should their shoes have soles, sir, when they've got no soles? But she upon her foot, sir, has a granite shoe, the strongest leather boot, sir, 6 would soon be through. Her toes, remember? The queen gave a howl of rage and dismay, and before she recovered her presence of mind, Kirti, having begun with the group nearest him, had 11 of the knights on their legs again. Stamp on their feet, he cried, as each man rose, and in a few minutes the hall was nearly empty, the goblins running from it as fast as they could, howling and shrieking and limping and cowering every now and then as they ran to cuddle their wounded feet in their hard hands, or to protect them from the frightful stamp of the armed men. And now Kirti approached the group, which, trusting in the queen and her shoe, kept their guard over the prostrate captain. The king sat on the captain's head, but the queen stood in front like an infuriated cat, with her perpendicular eyes gleaming green, and her hair standing half up from her horrid head. Her heart was quaking, however, and she kept moving about her skin-shod foot with nervous apprehension. When Kirti was within a few paces, she rushed at him, made one tremendous stamp at his opposing foot, which happily he withdrew in time, and caught him round the waist to dash him on the marble floor. But just as she caught him, he came down with all the weight of his iron-shod shoe upon her skin-shod foot. With a hideous howl, she dropped him, squatted on the floor, and took her foot in both her hands. Meanwhile, the rest rushed on the king and the bodyguard, and sent them flying, and lifted the prostrate captain, who was all but pressed to death. It was some moments before he recovered breath and consciousness. "Where is the princess?" cried Kirti again and again. No one knew, and off they all rushed in search of her. Through every room in the house they went, but nowhere was she to be found. Don't worry. Neither was one of the servants to be seen, but Kirti, who had kept to the lower part of the house, which was now quiet enough, began to hear a confused sound as of a distant hubbub, and set out to find where it came from. The noise grew as his sharp ears guided him to a stair, and so to the wine cellar. It was full of goblins, whom the butler was supplying with wine as fast as he could draw it. While the queen and her party had encountered the men-at-arms, Harelip with another company had gone off to search the house. They captured everyone they met, and when they could find no more, they hurried away to carry them safe to the caverns below. But when the butler, who was amongst them, found that their path lay through the wine cellar, he bethought himself of persuading them to taste the wine, and, as he had hoped, they no sooner tasted than they wanted more. They routed goblins on their way below, joined them, and when Kirti entered, they were all, with outstretched hands, in which were vessels of every description, from saucepan to silver cup, pressing around the butler, who sat at the tap of a huge cask, filling and filling. Here, I'll show you the picture. Kirti cast one glance around the palace before commencing his attack, and saw in the farthest corner a terrified group of domestics unwatched, but cowering without courage to attempt their escape. Amongst them was the terror-stricken face of Ludi, but nowhere could he see the princess. I think we can finish. I think I'll do it in another, because this has been 30 minutes. Okay, I'll record another.